Hello there, and welcome to this review of The Uplift War by David Brin. Now, David Brin and his books are a party that I am very late to. I know, he has been writing since the 80s. This copy is from the 90s, and I understand that when this book won the Hugo and Nebula awards, sometime in the 80s, he then revised it. So this is my revised edition. And from the 80s, never heard of them, discovered David Brin last year. This is the third in the Uplift series, and I have read the previous two, though I read them out of order. I found it utterly engrossing. I loved the reading experience, every part of it. I looked forward to sitting down with it every day at the end of the day when I had time for reading. At 636 pages, it is far from a fast read, and I was doing a lot of long shifts, so it's taken me, I think, over a week to get through that. That's quite a lot for me, because I read a lot and I read fast. Okay, so, as a series, I read the first two out of order. I read the second first, and the first second. And having read the third, I've got to say they all work perfectly well as standalones. This one especially, you don't need to have read the previous two ones. Star-Tide Rising is number 2. And for me, it doesn't really matter. There are constant references to Star-Tide Rising and the events in it, which I thoroughly enjoyed, by the way. And the events in that book are kind of suggested as the catalyst for the invasion that happens in this book. But given all things equal, I think you could read them perfectly well out of order. At least I know I could. So, Star-Tide Rising. It won the Locus Award as well. No, it was nominated as Best Novel for the 1987 Nebula Award. It won the 88 Hugo and Locus Awards. So, Sundiver was my least favourite in the series. Allegedly the number 1, but I read it number 2 and I found it confusing. There are many things about Brin's writing that I really enjoy. I love the fact that his science is very heavily biological science, and there's a lot of ecology. I love the complexity of his story building, and I love the fact that diplomatic relationships are a big thing. So, in this galaxy that he has invented, you've got so many intelligent species. They're like sand on the shore. And there's the Uplift series. So the Uplift War, the Uplift notion is that that there's never actually arisen sentience or intelligence in its own right. It's always an animal that has been uplifted by a pre-sentient species. So you've got this whole galactic concept based around clans who've been uplifted by an original progenitor, and then they started uplifting others. There's this whole system. But no one knows who uplifted humanity. Humanities are called wolflings regularly in this book. They seem to have achieved intelligence on their own, which breaks down the conservative elements in the galaxy who claims that there's no possibility for intelligence to arise on its own. It can only be uplifted by a client species. Sorry, by a progenitor species, and the ones that are uplifted are the clients. Sorry about that. Now, humanity made it to the galaxy, but before it did that, it had already started uplifting 2 other species. That's the dolphins that starred so strongly in Star-Tide Rising, which was one reason why Star-Tide Rising is my absolute favourite of these 3. And the seconds were the chimpanzees. So they have been uplifted. Too late for the rest of the galaxy to do anything about that, and they are both clients of humanity. Too late for the galaxy to do anything about that. But there's a lot of controversy about the whole thing. Now, in the Uplift War, we start on or around or about the planet of Garth. The planet of Garth was previously given as a lease to a specific species who kind of went insane and eradicated everything. Now, as I said earlier, one of the things I really love about David Brin's work is how he brings ecology into the whole thing. And this future galaxy which is every bit as political, shambolic, chaotic, and religion-based as human affairs on Earth are, which I love, actually. It's like the trope of the wise alien is a bit overdone, I feel. So anyway, into this shambolic universe, the one thing that most species respect is ecology. Because livable planets are so rare, an ecologically sustainable planet with good diversity is basically like a holy grail. Garth was such a planet when it was gifted to a species who abused it, ecologically devastated it. Now humans, as wolflings with no strong political backing, are only ever given planets that are ecologically damaged for leaseholds, and Garth has been given to them. And we start this book with another species called the Gubru. Now the Gubru, I really enjoyed what Brin did to create this species. I love his alien species. The Gubru are avian in nature. They were uplifted a long time ago. They've got their own client species. And I love the way that he knows enough about birds to create a civilization, a culture, alien behavior that feels bird-like, even though he doesn't belabor the subject unnecessarily. Now the Gubru are planning to attack Garth. The whole universe is in a bit of chaos, political and warfare-wise, due to the events in Startide Rising. And the Gubru think that by taking Garth hostage, they can force Earth to disclose information about Startide Rising events. Doesn't work. Earth doesn't have that information. No one does. But the Gubru invade Garth successfully. And I won't go into that too much. You should read it because amazing book. Having done that, Garth only has really token forces, and Earth is already beleaguered by other alien species and can't come to their rescue. One of their main supporters are a species whose name I am uncertain about being able to pronounce. Timbrimi, I think. Anyway, so they're described as a fascinating species. They've got speeded up metabolism so they can actually change their appearance to fit in with their demands on their body or to appear more like another species, which is what one of the Timbrimi does. Athaclena is the daughter of the main Timbrini diplomat to Garth. This is already sounding really complicated, isn't it? And it is, and Brin does it far better than I do. But when the planet is invaded, she is sent to the safety of the mountains with the son of the planetary commander, Megan. So Robert One Eagle, who have apparently some First Nations American in his background, and this alien who he knows, but they don't know each other well, they head for the mountains as the defense commences against the Gubru attacking the planet. The Gubru roll all over them, which is what they expect. One of our main protagonists is a chimp, or a neo-chimp as they're called sometimes in the book. Other times they're described as chims. So the male chimps are described as chims and the females as chimmies. I have to say that what Brin did with chimpanzees as a uplifted species in this book was really, really good. So in the same way that Startide Rising has dolphins as main protagonists, we've got a lot of chimpanzees as main protagonists here, as well as Robert One Eagle, Athaclena, the Timbrimi, and you've got many, many plot lines. Now, I'm not always a huge fan of many plot lines. I think sometimes there's too many of them and it makes them hard to keep track of. Never for a second do you doubt which protagonist you're with in this book. It's an absolute miracle of writing, and he deserved every award that he won just for that. So all the many different POVs give you a very nuanced and complete version of what's happening on the planet. And it also gives you the political background for it. Now, I find as I get older and I mature as a reader, I want politics. As a kid, I didn't. I can see why a young adult book would be very minimalistic in terms of politics. But as an adult, I see not pure politics in terms of governments and councillors, but the politics of interspecies, the politics of in between nations. All of these things are more and more part of my world. And a book that neglects them too much starts to feel more than superficial. And Brin does this so well. He makes it fun. He makes it interesting. He talks about all these alien species. A couple of alien species that have appeared in the previous two books also appear in this one. And I like that reinforcement. In actual fact, there's almost nothing to dislike about this book. It's nuanced. It's got many levels. You've got the Gubru avian invaders and their slow inability to achieve the goals they want. You've got the neo-chimps forming a resistance in the main city of Port Helena. And you've got an amazing tactic that David Brin, or the Gubru, David Brin through the Gubru, used to remove all the humans. So essentially, most of the protagonists here are chimps, and you don't have all the many influences that you would get if there were a lot of human protagonists here. The Gubru drop this poison gas, and he calls it hostage gas. Once inhaled, you get very sick. You need to go to the invaders for the antidote, and you need to keep getting that antidote. That means that all the humans have been removed and are kept virtually incarcerated. Not practically incarcerated, but virtually, because they can't get away from the antidote. And the Gubru have underestimated the neo-chimps. They think that they are half animals. They call them that regularly. They dismiss them. And so the spirited resistance that occurs from the mountains and from the city dismays them. A lot of that's Robert Ron and Athaclina working behind the scenes. But the chimp characters and their plot lines were really good. So multiple storylines, all converging, every single one of them done well. Later in the story, we also get this secondary plot from Athaclina's father, Uthakalthing. The okay, he was a diplomat, right? He was an ambassador from his species. They sound a bit like the slan in A. Van Gogh. They described as having tendrils and be very strong on emotional it's not telepathy, it's empathy. But they're very good at picking up the empathic signals from all around them and from other species as well. They also create these weird symbols, glyphs they're described, to reflect inner sensations or events. Most humans can't detect them, but Robert One Eagle starts to. And Athaclina teaches him some of them. The other thing that this unpronounceable species is well known for are for being tricksters. Tricksters and jokes, and some of their jokes aren't what a human would call funny, and many of them are very elaborate. So the ambassador fled the city of St. Helena almost too late. Too late to make it to safety on the islands like the rest of the humans did. Too late to escape the solar system. And this, we eventually learned, was part of an enormous joke that he was hatching on everyone, basically, except possibly not including his daughter and one chimp who was assisting him, including ambassador from another species, that starts mattering more and more as the plot progresses. So I think that's really all I need to say about the plot. Needless to say, the good guys win. The neo-chimps are seen as independent. The humans get back the planet of Garth, kind of conditionally and with a lot of support they hadn't had before. It's really, really involved, and it's really interesting, and it's deeply satisfying. This isn't a book that has gotchas. You don't have this one scene that you go back to and reread over and over, though I have reread a few scenes in here several times. But it's a slow burn. It's a slow burn with a lot in there, all of which you can enjoy. Because I was enjoying it so much and I was reading it so frequently, I didn't make a lot of notes while I was doing this. But one of the notes I did make was how much I enjoyed the fact that every patrolled patron level galactic species is essentially an environmentalist. We've got a conservative species who virtually worships the environment. None of them consider it to be disposable like too much of humanity does today. And humanity's early record of trying to decimate its ecological diversity is actually mentioned in this book as one of the reasons why the wolfling human species aren't terribly well received by the rest of the galaxy, even though they've evolved by the time they joined the galaxy. Now, this almost worship of all things environmental and diversity based is almost contradictory with all the other aspects of the galactic civilization, which is brutal, it's political, it's got laws which are often broken, and it's strange. But while it's contradictory, I actually found that becomes quite believable, because species are contradictory in their very nature. And there are always going to be different factions. And I love the way that he talks about the conservative and the liberal factions of the galaxy and how the different clans war against each other. I'm not for a second claiming that I understand it or I could replicate it. But the way he describes it, I don't have to remember it. And it's really, really good. There are a whole lot of really good quotes to do with the environment and species, if you're interested in that sort of thing, which of course I was. And the ending is kind of a surprise ending. It's all about uplift, yes, but there's a few unexpected elements to it which I'm not going to spoil. Now, my only complaint, the only point in this book where I wasn't thoroughly invested and thoroughly in awe of what was happening there, happened on page 673. And if that is the only complaint I can find to make out of 600... No, it can't be 600. There's 636 pages. Okay, so it was 573. Probably 573. I obviously wrote it down wrong. But my only complaint is, at this point, there's an uplift ceremony that is highly, highly unusual, debatable, influential to the plot, essential, which you should read about when you read this book. At some point in it, there is a basically fight to allegedly the death, a no-hold-barred fight between two chimps, as they call themselves. Now, I like fight scenes in general, but when that was thrown into this book, it was so glaringly inconsistent with everything else that I'd seen about the plot. The plot was all about manners, it was about precedence, it was about allowable versus non-allowable, and fight to the death between two species in this scenario, it just felt wrong. You know, when you're watching a movie and they suddenly insert a romance where the plot doesn't require it and you don't want it and the characters don't seem to fit in. Here the characters do fit in. You can see those two characters having at each other. But aside from that, I just really thought that was a very strange device for Brin to throw in there when he doesn't do fight scenes really that much in this book. Other book, yes. This book, no. It's like, it almost felt like it was an obligatory, I'm ticking off the fight scene box, and I would have been just as happy if he hadn't done that. So, inconsistent, everything in the plot, still, okay. But if you're going to do that, if you're going to write a fight scene where it doesn't need to be, and doesn't really progress anything, then for goodness sake, just write a fight scene, okay? Do it properly. Instead, This is not what I think is a proper fight scene. Our main protagonist that we are all cheering for is Fibbin, who is a Neo-Chimp. And the whole fight happens from his point of view, which is fine, except that Brin does this weird thing where we get a paragraph about what's happening in the fight, and then we slide into Fibbin's backstory about how he came to be there. And it just didn't work. It completely disrupted the fight scene. You had no notion of what was happening. And honestly, it was hard to care. It's hard to care about a fight scene where you keep slipping back in time. It doesn't seem like it matters. Broke up the fight scene. We knew most of that backstory already, let's be honest. And the bits we did not know had no purpose being added there. If you'd have added them when Fibbin first started climbing the mountain, fine, but there. I don't know. Still, other than that, we've got 636 pages of pure joy with no complaint, an awful lot of enjoyment, and if that is the only misstep that you can write, you fit into a book this enormous and this good, awesome. So, The Uplift War by David Brin. I'm not hearing a lot of people talking about Brin recently. Maybe it's because the books are so huge. That's what put me off for a couple of years there when I started seeing them in op shops. But they are thoroughly worth it. So, I do recommend. On to the next book. This was exactly the book that I wanted, by the way. When I picked up my last one, which was Poison in Jest, a very classic mystery thriller, this was the book that I really should have picked up. This was the book that I wanted to read. Contemporary, evolved, interesting, mature science fiction at its best. Thank you for watching, and read good books. Maybe even this one.